Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to Pride Action TV. My name is Kim Hunt, and I'm the Executive Director of the Pride Action Tank, which is a project of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. Pride Action Tank, or PAT as we lovingly call it, has 6 issue areas: aging, financial security, health, housing, safety, and youth. And we work on a number of issues related to anything from LGBTQ youth homelessness through making sure that we have adequate public accommodations for folks who are transgender to gender nonconforming. So welcome to 2017. Our first guest of the year is Brian C. Johnson, who is the new Executive Director, or CEO is actually your title, right? Fancy. Of Equality Illinois. And we're delighted to have Brian here today. Brian,
thanks, Kim.
You've been CEO 6 months?
I'm getting veteran now. 6 months.
6 months?
Yeah.
So before we talk about all that good stuff, let's talk about what we were talking about earlier. How about New Year's resolutions?
New Year's resolutions.
What are yours?
I should ask you first. I know. You know, so one that I made was to be more intentional with my technology. Specifically, I'm trying something I did a while ago, which was a technology Sabbath. So I'm going to take one day a week, I think it's going to be Sunday, where I can use technology purposely. So I can use my smartphone to call a friend, send an important email, reach out to a loved one, but I'm not going to use technology to be on social media or to play my games or to read the news. I'm just going to try to put it away and live that technology Sabbath.
Wow.
What about you?
Can I take that one?
Yeah, I guess so. This is an easy conversation.
Well, I typically don't do New Year's resolutions.
I know,
per
it's
se.
so high stakes.
It
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
but I try to focus on an intention each year, and that may be one word, or
That's
sometimes
very
it's just
yoga
a way to.
of you.
I wish I did take yoga. That is actually on my list of things to do.
There you go.
But this year, my intention is to argue more about the things that I believe in.
Oh.
And
Like, give me an example of what that might look like.
Well, to be more vocal, a lot of times I'm a very laid back person, and I won't necessarily engage with someone who, I won't say just has a different opinion than me, but is loud and boisterous and very dynamic about getting their point of view across, and I usually won't go toe-to-toe with people like that.
Yeah.
But after taking a trip late last year, I and our
to the argument capital of the world.
To the argument capital of the world.
Yeah.
and frankly, after the U.S. election, I've decided to really focus more on what I believe in rather than what I want to fight against.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I have a good friend who's a preacher in Harlem who, whenever he wants to disagree with me, just nods his head and goes, and then he goes, you know, Brian, I'm going to take a slight departure from where you are. And then he just moves on and just totally disagrees with me. But that, like, slight entry point is, like, so calm. It's authentic to him. But it really sets him up to tell me I'm totally wrong.
I like that.
Yeah.
Then that way it's not so argumentative.
Totally.
It really is about having a conversation.
Totally.
And a debate.
Totally.
So I've picked up something from you already.
There you go.
In the short time that we've been on the air. And I want to remind people this is a call-in show. We want your questions and comments once we get going. And the number is 312-738-1060. So, Brian, I have had the pleasure of knowing you for 6 months.
Yes. You're one of my oldest friends in this world.
Right? And I'm always very amazed by your background and what brings you to the work of Equality Illinois. So if you could share that with our audience, I think they'd come to know you a little better as well.
Sure. I mean, my path, Kim, as you know, is really different in that before June 1st, I'd never worked full-time in the LGBTQ civil rights space. I'd cut my teeth in public education justice. I started my career as a first-grade teacher. I had taught in a low-income school on the north side of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And for a kid like me who had grown up in a middle-class white family, who had gone to public schools that served my family, my sister and I very well, seeing what injustice looked like in a 100% low-income, 100% African-American school on the north side of Baton Rouge just lit a fire underneath me. It was enraging, and still is to me to this day, how we are willing to perpetuate systems of oppression and injustice on low-income children of color in so many ways, so many ways. And I don't mean just what's in the four walls of the schools, but within the communities in which they live. And so I spent 17 years in that work. I bounced around, spent a lot of time in California. And I was working in public schools, I was working with teachers, I was working to get teachers who had taught in low-income communities more politically active, and I'd moved to Chicago a couple years ago doing that work. And gosh, about a year ago now, I was finding myself getting angrier and angrier about the state of LGBTQ civil rights, in part because I was planning my own wedding with my then fiance, now husband, and so the question of what is the future of our family and how can we guarantee that we as a married couple and hopefully we as a family with children one day will have the rights and privileges that we have now. In part because I was really caught off guard by the speed and the vitriol of the backlash against marriage equality. I mean, there were 202 bills introduced in state legislatures in a single year following the Obergefell decision trying to cut back on LGBTQ equality. I mean, it was fierce. And, you know, the third thing, Kim, we've talked about is, in light of all that, I'm getting angrier and angrier, and I'm hearing people muse publicly about whether or not the future of LGBTQ civil rights work is done because we've arrived, because we now have the right and privilege of marriage, which, as I like to remind people, straight people have had for thousands of years. So I was getting angrier and angrier, and when my amazing predecessor, Bernard, announced that he was leaving after 7 years, I told the people I knew on the board that they better find somebody, and they said I should start talking to them. And I said, no, I do race justice, I do class justice, I work in and around schools. And they said, well, why don't you just have one conversation with us? And one conversation led to another, and I just became convinced this is the time that we will look back 25 years, 30 years, 40 years from now and say we either gave away our privileges and our rights, or we doubled down on our legacy and demanded a future that is even more equal than today. And I wanted to be part of building that.
Yeah, I love the background that you bring to Equality Illinois now. That's not the background that has been traditional for Equality Illinois.
Right.
So in that vein, tell us what Equality Illinois does, and then I know you were on this amazing listening tour for the first few months that you were
so powerful.
there.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more about what you learned on tour.
Yeah. So, you know, Equality Illinois has been around for 25 years, and we are the statewide LGBTQ civil rights organization. We are actually three entities in one. We are a 501c3 that does education and outreach work across the state. We are a 501c4 that lobbies elected officials and decision makers to adopt more equitable and fair policies for the LGBTQ community. And we also have a PAC that endorses and supports LGBTQ-friendly candidates. And those three entities in one is a little bit of a unique structure, but allows us to have a more comprehensive strategy about making sure that we are building a future that is brighter, more affirming, more accepting, and more equal. Go ahead.
You know, for folks who don't know the distinctions of those categories, can you just delve into that a little bit more? And because I think people need to know why that's such a powerful combination.
So, as a 501c3, that is, those are the ones you were talking about? Yeah, so a 501c3 is your traditional nonprofit. That is one that works for the social benefit and social welfare of the public. And there are a lot of restrictions on what 501c3s can do. And so that is our biggest arm. That is where 90% of our work is. And that's honestly where we do our trainings, our outreach programs, our communication, our policy research. That is where we do an incredible amount of that work. A 501c4 is also a nonprofit, but it's a nonprofit that the federal government says can engage in more direct and consistent lobbying activities. So once we have researched and talked to stakeholders and talked to experts and can identify what's a key policy that we think, if adopted, would make Illinois a fairer and more equal place, then through our 501c4 arm, we engage elected officials and encourage them to adopt those policies. Our Political Action Committee is not a nonprofit. That is not regulated by the IRS. It is a totally separate entity. And a Political Action Committee is one that can engage in politics, that can endorse candidates, that can raise money for giving to political causes. And so a lot of the social justice organizations many people know of are one or two of those things. But Equality Illinois is three separate organizations. And because of that, we can pull on a lot of levers to achieve change.
Yeah, and I think that's just huge for people to know, because that is so unique in the social justice space, to have all those different options available to you to do things like try to deal with this non-budget that we have.
Yes, unbelievable. Yeah.
Is there any hope of getting a budget this fiscal year?
Oh gosh, I think if I knew the answer to that, I'd probably be a wealthier man. We talked a little bit about the listening tour, and one of the things that I heard across the state is, particularly I heard this in towns where there are large populations of more vulnerable LGBTQ people, people who rely on the social services that are funded in part by state dollars. I heard this a lot in towns across the state where the state is a large employer of people, that not having a budget puts the most vulnerable in our community, who in many ways are already a vulnerable community, at risk and at jeopardy. On the north side of Chicago, perhaps not having a state budget doesn't impact the day-to-day lives of everyday Chicagoans. But throughout the state, and certainly in other pockets of Chicago, not having a state budget is a real detriment to being the state that lives up to the values that we say we have. So I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what it will take. I do know that it will take hard work from both sides of the aisle, but we are supportive of many different efforts that will get us to a fair and just budget.
And we have to continue to put the pressure on the governor and the elected officials.
Absolutely.
As well.
And tell the stories of people who are hurting.
That's so huge, to tell stories, to get behind those statistics and policies and get to the real people.
Right.
Yeah, the important stuff. Knowing that we're kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
What other issues do you anticipate Equality Illinois working on this legislative session in particular?
Well, if I can take the roundabout way to that, I'd love to tell you a little bit about what we heard when I was traveling the state more broadly this summer. So from about June to mid-September, I went to dozens of communities. I went as far south as Cairo, as far north as McHenry and Rockford. I went over to the Quad Cities in the Metro East. I went to Champaign-Urbana. I went to towns all the way in between. And I just sat in people's living rooms and in coffee shops and in their offices. I even went to a campsite. I went to a massage parlor. I would meet people wherever they were, living rooms. And I asked people the Ruby Sales community organizing question of where does it hurt? When have you been proud? When have you been harmed? What are you afraid of? What are you hopeful for? If you had a magic wand, because every member of the LGBTQ community has a magic wand somewhere, and you could change something that would make the lives of LGBTQ people better, right in this community, what would it be? And I heard hundreds of stories. But often the stories clumped into four primary areas. So one, there were stories around how we are not acknowledged or treated affirmingly within K-12 schools. Certainly there are issues around policies that affirm our transgender youth and making sure that teachers are culturally competent when teaching and engaging with LGBTQ youth. But also, to me, it is a deep thing of injustice, the fact that we're not acknowledged in the curriculum. You do not have to say when you're teaching about Jane Addams or Alan Turing or Walt Whitman or Oscar Wilde that these were LGBTQ individuals that contributed to our society today. And there can be no justice if we are not acknowledged in our curriculum. So there were conversations around that. There were conversations around how we don't have access, consistently good access, to adequate and affirming health care. I mean, we heard stories of the one doctor in a 5-county radius in the southern tip of the state who would provide the medicine that will prevent the transmission of HIV. We heard doctors who wouldn't serve pediatricians who wouldn't serve the children of same-sex couples. We heard doctors who couldn't help transgender patients and wouldn't even attempt to try or refer them to somebody who could. And the third thing, we heard a lot about the poor treatment of LGBTQ people in the criminal justice system. A lot of people don't know, but twice as many people identify as LGBTQ within the prison system as outside the prison system.
Wow.
We are overrepresented there. And we are not treated adequately and affirmingly. I mean, this is everything from where inmates are housed to giving inmates the access to gender-appropriate clothing to a host of issues. And then fourth, we heard a lot about public safety. We are still overly targeted as victims of hate crimes. I think certainly the Pulse nightclub shooting demonstrated that. And for members of our community whose identities overlap with multiple historically marginalized communities, we hear them particularly to be a low-income, queer, person of color who may be transgender, is to be a series of identities that rarely feels as safe as they should in our communities. So, yeah.
That is intense.
It's a lot. It is a lot. But it's important, I think, we've talked about this. One of the reasons that I wanted to start with that is the heart of justice and the foundation of change is just listening to people about where their pain is. And that it doesn't start from the grass tops conversations.
Right.
It can, but it's so much better if it starts from real conversations on the ground in people's homes and in people's communities. So all those things are the basis for our new strategic plan that we're moving forward. And I won't give that away right now. I think my team would be very upset since it's still in draft form. But right now we're going to continue to work on many of the things we've worked on over the past 12 months, making sure that our birth records more readily represent the gender that we acknowledge we are. We are working to make sure that, in coalition with many other people, that you can't be denied the right to serve on a jury because you are a member of the LGBTQ community or a person of color or a woman. One thing, and you may know this, but one thing we're working on is, in Illinois today, and as most recently as I think 2009, you can be acquitted of a crime of murder if you claim successfully that the reason you assaulted that victim was because you panicked when they revealed that they were gay or transgender.
Wow.
Yep, you can get off the hook for that.
Wow.
So we're working with many great legislators trying to make sure that is no longer an option.
You have just listed a litany of issues that are supremely important to the LGBTQ community, and as you mentioned, when you layer on the many other identities that folks have that are traditionally marginalized, you see that there's just a tremendous amount of work that still needs to happen within this community and in coalition with others, of course. And so it really is frustrating, this time maybe a year or so ago when folks were trying to figure out what's left to do after the marriage equality passed.
Kim, I was in my old job. I found myself one day crying at work, which is a sign that you need to do something differently. But it was this exact point when people would say, and I'll be really blunt. Somebody told me, "Why are you doing this? Don't gay people have it pretty good right now?" And I just thought to myself, well, one, are you not reading the news? Are you not seeing what's going down in North Carolina? Are you not seeing that we have those same bills introduced here in Illinois?
Yeah.
But also, and you mentioned our overlapping identities, the right to marry is incredible. And on May 14th, when I stood with my husband in front of 200 of our family and friends, legally married from the start, I was awash with wonder and gratitude. And I do not take that lightly. That being said, the day after Governor Quinn signed into law marriage equality in the state of Illinois, that transgender woman in Peoria who can't find a doctor to meet her needs, her life was not meaningfully better the next day. Or that queer African-American boy growing up on the south side of Chicago who is worried about his own safety, the right to potentially marry somebody decades down the way is good, but did not make his life the next day meaningfully better. And there are so many ways in which we need to fight for a more just, equal, and accepting Illinois. Marriage was just the basic way to open the door, but there's so much more to do.
So true. And I know Equality Illinois is focused on state level, but we've just had a presidential election that
Wait, we did?
Yeah. It's given us all pause. And has had us resting up over the holidays, frankly, to get ready for the battle ahead. But Equality Illinois had this wonderful event. Was it last month or November? It was in November.
Pride Action Tank was a co-sponsor.
Yes, but I think just bringing the community together the way you did was so meaningful, and I know other organizations did similar things because I felt like people just really needed to be with community.
Absolutely.
Is there anything in particular that you learned from that experience, and we'll throw in the listening tours as well, that we can carry forward into action over the next year?
Yeah. So I'll answer that in two parts. So I think, yes, I mean, what we learned on a more granular basis was certainly the depth and reach of how this administration could harm people. But I want to say, there are people coming to me saying, oh, now that Trump is elected, so many things are going to change, or this is a whole new direction. And I just keep telling people, actually, the Trump election is just magnifying what we're hearing. I told you we heard about concerns in public education. The fact that there's going to be a Secretary of Education who will repeal the guidance requiring schools that receive federal funding to have trans-affirming policies will only make that worse. When we talked about lack of access to adequate and affirming health care, when the Affordable Care Act is repealed, I mean, thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients in Illinois, 7,000 patients at Howard Brown alone, are at risk of losing their health insurance. So it's not that the Trump election created this whole new world that we didn't see, it's that it is magnifying the concerns the LGBTQ community already had. And so I think there's a ton of ways to act. I mean, I will say here at Equality Illinois, we are launching in partnership with state-based and city-based groups across the country as part of the National Equality Action Team, monthly phone banks here in Chicago beginning in February, where we will be rallying and calling voters in other places to have them put pressure on their decision makers to ensure that they're adopting non-discrimination laws in their jurisdictions.
Nice.
We are also working much more closely with community groups, LGBTQ community groups across the state, including in congressional districts that have Republican elected officials, to make sure that we are doing our part to strengthen those groups so that they are more powerful when they lobby and agitate their elected officials. And the third way is we are looking for partner groups that are working with other groups that may be harmed by this administration. So those are three ways we are trying to come to action.
Wow, wow. Thank you for that. It looks like we have a caller. Hello?
Right. I wanted to know if you talk about senior queer and the need for full dignified care and elder retirement community, nursing home, and just the entire issue of queer elders.
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. We couldn't quite hear all of it, but I think the question was about making sure that we're taking care of queer elders, and that is a population that is woefully underserved. I will say one thing Pride Action Tank is doing is in May we are having a summit on LGBTQ older adults called Outaging. We just got the title, Outaging. A summit on our possibilities, which is planned in part by LGBTQ older adults and others.
Yeah. The work Pride Action Tank is doing in that is so critical. I would say we are working where we can. And one of the co-sponsors of the Action Forum was SAGE, which is a group that works and promotes the rights of LGBTQ elders. We are certainly concerned in areas around the state budget, in areas around the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Those are areas where we are hearing our LGBTQ seniors and elders are most at risk and most concerned, and we are leaning in there absolutely where we can.
And I will add to that Lambda Legal has also got some impact litigation going on regarding LGBTQ older adults. So we're, I will say late as a community to addressing the issues of LGBTQ seniors, but we are rapidly catching up. Brian, you mentioned quite a few activities that are going on with Equality Illinois, so I wanted folks to know that we at Pride Action Tank can help connect you to Equality Illinois and the activities that they're doing, and you can reach us at a number of ways. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, our website is prideactiontank.org, and you can also reach us at prideactiontank@AIDSchicago.
All the ways that millennials get in touch with
all
people.
All the ways. There are many ways. There are many ways you can get in touch with us. So, Brian, it is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Happy New Year to you, to everybody out there. Let's make 2017 a more just and equal year.
Absolutely. And I want to have you back on the show at some time so we can get an update on what's happening and see where you are with your strategic plan.
I love that.
And how you are continuing to action all the things you heard during the listening session. And then one more thing before we go. Pride Action Tank and Windy City Times are having their, I don't want to call it the second annual sleep in because the first one was a sleep out and it was in 2015. But the goal is to bring awareness to the issue of LGBTQ youth homelessness as well as raise money for organizations that are serving LGBTQ youth. It's happening February 24th. The website is sleepinschicago.org. You can also contact us at Pride Action Tank if you didn't catch that. So Happy New Year, everyone. We hope you have a safe and prosperous year. We know that we have a lot of work to do ahead of us, so let's take care of ourselves and everybody go out and find one organization to support this year.
Or two.
Or two or three. Thank you. Bye-bye.